He's going to die if we don't help him. The words tore out of Sofia Morales before she could stop them. Before she could swallow them back down where they belonged, buried under 8 years of keeping quiet, keeping her head down, keeping her mouth shut. October night. Highway 101 northbound. 11:47 p.m. according to the dashboard clock of a borrowed sedan that had finally given up the ghost somewhere between the Gilroy exits and the darkness of the Santa Cruz Mountains. The cold came in through the windows like a blade wrapped in ice. Not the gentle cold of a California autumn, but something bitter and sharp and merciless, the kind of cold that cut through the threadbare Goodwill jacket Sofia wore, that turned her breath to clouds of white mist. 3 children slept in the back seat, bundled under the one blanket she owned. Emma, age 6, her dark hair spilled across her older sister's shoulder. The twins, Marcus and Miguel, age 4, curled against each other like they'd been born that way. 30 feet ahead, a black SUV pulled to a stop, its hazard lights blinking orange against the dead night. Then another. Then another. A convoy that seemed to materialize from nowhere, sweeping across the highway with the weight of something inevitable. Sofia's heart began to hammer. She stepped out of the sedan, her shoes clicking against the asphalt. Cold air bit at her exposed skin. Her breath came in shallow pools as she watched 2 men in expensive suits emerge from the lead vehicle. They moved with the practiced silence of people trained to move through violence without leaving footprints. Their eyes swept across her like searchlights before landing on the car behind them, calculating, assessing, dismissing. One of them, tall, shoulders broad as a building, face scarred from right temple to left jawline, turned toward her. His hand rested on something beneath his jacket. A warning. Sofia's mouth went dry. But then the back door of the lead SUV swung open, and she saw him. The man inside wore a white dress shirt that had been expensive perhaps an hour ago. Now it was soaked crimson from shoulder to ribs. His skin held the particular whiteness of someone whose blood was leaving his body faster than it wanted to stay. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they were beginning to lose focus. Nicholas Caruso. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that the man bleeding against Italian leather in the back of a black SUV was the same man who controlled every restaurant, every nightclub, every gambling operation from the marina to the mission. She didn't know that his brother had tried to kill him 4 hours ago in a private dining room at Soto Terra, that the bullet had come from someone he loved, someone he trusted, someone he had raised like a son. She didn't know any of this. What she knew was, this man was dying. His hand lifted, fingers trembling, reaching for something. The scar on his face seemed to deepen in the orange light of the hazards. His lips moved but no sound came. Sofia moved before her mind could catch up to her body. She walked toward the SUV, toward the 2 armed men, toward the dying stranger in the back seat. Her legs felt unsteady, like they belonged to someone else, like she was watching herself from outside her own skin. The scarred man, Tony, though she didn't know that yet, raised his weapon. Not all the way. Just an adjustment. A promise. Lady, step back or... But Nicholas's hand rose again, and this time it was a command. Not a question. Not a request. The kind of gesture that men had learned to obey or die. Let her. Sofia climbed into the SUV. The leather was warm and slick beneath her palms. She tore at his shirt with fingers that shook, the fine linen ripping like paper. The wound gaped, dark and terrible, the bullet hole surrounded by bruised tissue and seeping blood. She'd been a nursing student once, before her mother got sick, before everything fell apart like a house made of cards in a wind nobody could stop. Before her world became about survival instead of dreams. She pulled off her scarf, the same scarf her mother had knitted 43 years ago, before the cancer came, before the medical bills turned into a mountain of debt that crushed everything, and pressed it against his shoulder. Hard. The way she'd been taught. Apply pressure. Elevate if possible. Keep talking. Keep them present. Stay with me, she said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Strong. It didn't feel strong. It felt like she was someone else. Count backwards from 100. Keep counting. Don't stop. He stared at her with those storm cloud eyes. She could see the exact moment his mind registered the shock of it. Nobody touched him without permission. Nobody commanded him. Nobody, in 15 years of building an empire from the ashes of his father's death, from the wounds of his brother's betrayal, had ever told him what to do and lived long enough to regret it. But he counted. 100. 99. 98. His voice was deep, like the floor of an ocean that had never seen light. She pressed harder on the wound, felt the bleeding begin to slow, and her mind catalogued what she was seeing with the part of her that remembered school, that remembered believing she could be more than this. The shoulder wound was a through and through. The bullet had missed the subclavian artery by centimeters. Centimeters. The space between life and a closed casket. 97. 96. You're doing good, she whispered. Keep going. Stay with me. The man with the scar, Tony, had lowered his weapon. He stared at his boss being ordered like a child by a woman in a stained jacket that cost $8, if it had ever cost that much. His other man, Nino, stood frozen outside the open door, the cold October wind moving through his expensive suit like it owned him. How long? The scarred man asked. His voice was careful. Controlled. Testing. Sofia didn't look up. Her hands were applying pressure, her mind was calculating, her eyes were assessing the wound's depth and angle and trajectory. 20 minutes to a hospital or he doesn't make it. The artery is too close. He needs blood. He needs a surgeon. He needs... She paused. She looked up at Tony. Where's the nearest hospital with a trauma unit? Boss, we can't go public. Cops will. Take us to Doc Martinez, Nicholas said. His eyes were still on hers, and even through the shock, even through the blood loss, there was something in them that terrified her. Recognition. Like he was seeing her for the first time, and the weight of his attention was a physical thing. And get her kids. My children, Sofia said quickly. They're asleep in the sedan. I can't just... You just saved my life, Nicholas said. His hand reached up, unsteady, and covered hers where it pressed against his wound. You think I'd let you freeze on this highway? Nino was already moving, his long strides carrying him back toward the borrowed sedan. Sofia wanted to protest. She wanted to gather Emma and the twins herself, wanted to keep them close, wanted to shield them from whatever this was. But her hands were pressed against a man's bleeding shoulder, and she was learning the first lesson that Nicholas Caruso had learned when he was 8 years old and his mother didn't come home from the hospital. Sometimes survival requires trusting the wrong people. The convoy moved like a living thing through the darkness. 2 SUVs. Hazard lights blinking orange. Heading toward San Francisco, toward the lights that glittered like spilled gold across the bay, toward a doctor who asked no questions and a safe house where the world couldn't reach. And in the back seat of the lead vehicle, Sofia Morales kept her hands pressed against the wound of a man she'd never met, whispering words of steadiness, and began the transformation from the invisible nobody she'd been for 8 years into someone he would never be able to ignore again. The clock in the dashboard read 11:52 p.m. 15 minutes had passed. Or perhaps 1,000 years. Time moved differently in darkness, differently when you held someone's life in your hands. Now let us go back. Not to that moment on the highway, but 8 years before, to the autumn morning when Sofia Morales arrived in San Francisco with $273 in her pocket and a suitcase that held everything she'd ever owned. Before the highway. Before the blood. Before the dark-eyed man who would change everything. Back to the beginning, when she was nobody at all. The Greyhound bus pulled into the station at 6:15 in the morning. Sofia hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire drive watching the landscape change from the brown scrubland of inland California to the green rolling hills to finally the urban sprawl that opened up like a mouth swallowing her whole. The engine hissed as it came to a stop. Doors folded open. People shuffled out into the gray San Francisco morning. Sofia stood in the aisle with her suitcase at her feet, her jacket bunched in her hands, her heart beating in a rhythm that felt new and dangerous. She had no job waiting. No apartment. No family here. She had an aunt's address that might be outdated, a phone number that might not work, and the absolute certainty that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. She climbed down the steps anyway. The air smelled like salt and exhaust and the particular loneliness of a city where 8 million people moved past each other without seeing. She set her suitcase down on the concrete. It was a cheap suitcase, the kind with a broken wheel that dragged and scraped behind her as she walked. $273. That was all she had left after paying for the bus ticket, after clearing out her apartment back in Fresno, after her mother's funeral. $273, and no idea how long it would have to last. She could feel the beginning of something cold in her chest, something that felt like fear, but she swallowed it down. Swallowing things down was becoming her expertise. Swallowing down fear, down grief, down the voice that whispered that this was foolish, that she was foolish, that a girl with a nursing degree incomplete and a dead mother and nothing to her name had no business coming to the most expensive city in California alone. She pulled up the address on a borrowed phone at the bus station and started walking. The city revealed itself in small pieces. A coffee shop where 3 lattes cost more than she was willing to spend. A park where homeless people had set up an entire village of tents. A building with a for rent sign that showed an apartment for $2,400 a month. She walked past it knowing that number was a fantasy, the kind of thing that existed in other people's lives, not in hers. Her aunt's street, when she found it, was lined with Victorian houses painted in shades of cream and pale green. The one she was looking for was painted a soft blue. Sofia climbed the front steps. She raised her hand to knock. She hesitated. If her aunt wasn't home? If she'd moved? If she didn't remember Sofia or didn't want to help or had a different life now that didn't have room for a grief-stricken niece? She knocked. The woman who answered was small and grey-haired and familiar, though Sofia hadn't seen her in almost 5 years. Her Aunt Margot. She was wearing a bathrobe and holding a coffee cup, and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then something that might have been warmth, or might have been obligation, or might have been something in between. Sofia. "Hi, Tia," Sofia said. "I'm sorry to show up like this. I didn't have anyone else to." The sentence fractured. She hadn't let herself cry in weeks, but now, standing on her aunt's doorstep, something cracked. "Come in," Margot said. "Come in. Don't stand there in the cold." Sofia stepped into a house that smelled like old furniture and cooking oil. Her aunt ushered her inside, into a kitchen where a man sat reading the newspaper. He glanced up with mild interest before returning to the sports section. Sofia's aunt didn't introduce him. "I can only stay a few days," Margot said. "I don't have room for, I have room, but my roommate's situation is complicated. A week maximum. You need to find work immediately. Do you understand?" Sofia nodded. Of course she understood. This was charity, and charity had limits. "There's a restaurant hiring," Margot continued. "Downtown. Near the Embarcadero. They don't ask many questions if you smile right and don't complain about the shifts. A week maximum." Sofia set her suitcase down on the kitchen tile floor. It was the color of old blood, the grout stained with use. She could already feel the invisible clock ticking. 7 days. 168 hours. $273. She was 22 years old, and she was already calculating how much rice cost, how many hours she'd have to work, how long she could survive on almost nothing. The restaurant was called Marcello's. It occupied a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a vintage clothing shop, the kind of place that served red sauce and garlic bread and thin pasta to people who worked in shipping and finance and the Port Authority. Sofia arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, her best interview clothes hanging loose on her frame. She'd lost 15 pounds since her mother's funeral, and her resume printed on paper she'd bought at the dollar store. The manager was a man named Douglas Hale. He was thin, with the kind of pale skin that suggested he'd been born in shadow and never ventured into light. His eyes were blue, but not the kind of blue that suggested depth. The kind that suggested distance. He looked her up and down with an expression that was already calculating what he could do with her. "Can you work tonight?" he asked. "Yes," Sofia said. 50-hour shift. Starts at 4 p.m. Ends when it ends. $12 an hour plus tips. He lit a cigarette. The restaurant was technically non-smoking. He didn't care. "You look desperate." "I like that. Desperate people don't complain." Sofia should have walked out. Every instinct told her to turn around, to find another restaurant, another job, another path. But her aunt's words echoed, a week maximum, and the numbers were too clear in her head. $12 an hour times 168 hours was $2,016 if she worked full-time, but nobody worked full-time at restaurants, not as new staff, and the tips would be whatever crumbs people felt like leaving, and that meant. "I'll start tonight," Sofia heard herself say. The first shift lasted 16 hours. Her feet blistered inside her only pair of work shoes. Her arms ached from carrying plates. She spilled her entire pot of coffee on her legs, and Douglas watched her wince and said nothing, just smiled that thin smile, and she understood in that moment that kindness had different rules in poverty. Kindness was a luxury for people who could afford to refuse. The money, at the end, was $134. Plus tips of $18.43. The tips came from a woman who left coins on a table where she'd ordered a bottle of water and eaten nothing. Sofia paid her aunt $50 for the week. That left her with $241 total. She started looking for rooms to rent immediately. What she would find was a converted closet in the basement of Margaret Harrington's mansion on Pacific Heights, with a window that looked out at ankle level to the street. What she would find was Margaret Harrington herself, a woman with silver hair and jewelry that cost more than Sofia would earn in a year, a woman who would hire Sofia to care for 3 children she'd adopted from overseas as status symbols, to work 14-hour days for $300 a week, to sleep in that converted closet and wake to the sound of her employer's heels clicking on the marble floor above her head. What she would find was Douglas Hale's hands on her wrist when she refused to stay late. What she would find was Margaret's voice, cold and cutting, in front of dinner guests. She's from rural Mexico originally. So grateful for any opportunity. Isn't that right, Sofia? What she would find was 8 years that would feel like 80. But first, she found a single room in a boarding house in the Mission District, $1,200 a month, split between 3 people who shared 1 bathroom. She found a job at another restaurant, then another, trying to build hours until she had enough for survival. She found that survival meant choosing between food and medication, between bus fare and heat, between sleeping and earning, between almost everything. She found that invisibility had a price, and she was paying it in small increments every single day. And she had no way of knowing that on a cold October night 8 years later, invisibility would be exactly what she needed to save the life of a man who would change everything. 8 years. That was how long Sofia Morales had been invisible. She stood in the marble foyer of the Harrington mansion on Pacific Heights, her 3 children clustered against her legs like frightened animals. Emma, her oldest, was 6 now. The twins had just turned 6 as well. They were born 3 months after their father died in a construction accident, born into a world that had no place for them, born into Sofia's arms with nothing but determination and $241 in her savings account. Margaret Harrington descended the curved staircase like a woman accustomed to being watched. Silver hair swept back from a face that had never known hunger, never known the weight of choosing between medication and heat. Her jewelry caught the light, diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, each stone worth more than Sofia would earn in a year of full-time work. "You're punctual," Margaret said. Not a compliment. An observation, the way one might note that a tool had arrived on time for use. "Yes," Sofia whispered. "The position is live-in. 6 in the morning until 8 at night. Sundays you receive for hours. The salary is $300 per week. You and your children will sleep in the storage room off the kitchen." Sofia's breath caught. $300 a week. $1,800 a month. Enough to survive if she could find a second job. Enough to keep the twins and Emma fed if she rationed carefully, if she didn't sleep much, if she didn't get sick. "When can I start?" Sofia asked. Margaret gestured toward the back of the house. "Now." The storage room was 8 feet by 10 feet. Concrete floor. One bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Shelves of cleaning supplies lined the walls, and in the corner, Margaret had placed 3 sleeping bags on top of a yoga mat. Emma looked up at her mother with eyes too old for her age. Eyes that had already learned the shape of loss. "Mama, where's our bed?" Emma asked. Sofia knelt down, her knees cracking against the concrete. She pulled her daughter close, breathed in the smell of her hair, coconut shampoo she'd bought at the dollar store, and smiled in a way that required every ounce of strength she possessed. "We're going to make this an adventure, okay? Like camping. Remember when Daddy took us camping?" A lie? They'd never been camping. But Emma needed the story more than she needed the truth. "Will Daddy come camping again?" Emma asked. Sofia couldn't answer. She just pulled her daughter tighter and held on. The first day was Monday. Margaret's 2 adopted children, boys ages 8 and 10, both pale and angry in ways that suggested money could not fix, sat at the kitchen table waiting for Sofia to serve breakfast. One of them, the taller boy with red hair and a mouth like a trap, looked at Sofia as she placed eggs in front of him. He picked up his fork and flicked it. The egg scattered across the table, across Sofia's apron, onto the floor. "These are cold," he said. "Get new ones." Sofia felt Margaret's eyes on her from the doorway. She felt the weight of those eyes, the message in them: you are not here to be treated well. You are here to be used. She scraped the eggs from the table into the trash. "Of course," Sofia said. "Right away." The second week, Margaret hosted a dinner party. 23 guests in the dining room. Sofia moved between tables with a wine bottle in one hand and a plate balanced on the other, invisible as the air, present only as a function. At one point, Margaret gestured toward Sofia with her cocktail glass, and Sofia froze. The gesture meant she was about to be introduced. About to be displayed. "This is our help," Margaret said to the table, her voice bright and social. "She's from where again, Sofia?" "Somewhere rural." "Mexico," Sofia said quietly. "Yes, that's right. So grateful for any opportunity, aren't you, Sofia?" "The children just adore her. Isn't she simply wonderful?" The guest smiled at Sofia the way one smiles at a painting. Something that existed to beautify the room but was not expected to respond. Not expected to be human. Sofia cleared the plates faster. But across the city, in an office on the 34th floor of a building in the financial district, Nicholas Caruso sat behind a desk made of Italian marble and listened to information that would change the trajectory of his life. He was 37 years old. 6'2", with shoulders that filled his tailored suit like a man built for violence. His dark hair showed silver at the temples, and a scar ran from the outside corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, the result of a blade fight when he was 23, before he'd learned that his reputation could do the damage without the scar needing to do any at all. Tony Russo stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the San Francisco Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge was visible in the distance, orange and impossible and beautiful, the way violence is sometimes beautiful when you've lived with it long enough. Marco met with them again, Tony said. No need to specify who them were. Everyone understood. The Castellano family. The family that had been trying to move into North Beach for 5 years. The family that wanted what was Nicholas's. How many times? Nicholas asked. 3 times this month. Always the same restaurant. Back table. He arrives through the kitchen. Nicholas didn't move. His hands remained on the desk, perfectly still, the way a predator remained still before the strike. Outside, the city hummed with the noise of people who had no idea that loyalty was dying in this room. That family meant nothing. That blood could be betrayed as easily as anything else. My own brother, Nicholas said. You want me to? I want you to confirm it first. Get photographs. I want emails, texts, anything that proves what he's doing. And Tony? Nicholas looked up, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky before a storm. If he's selling us out, if he's really doing this, then I'll handle it myself. Tony nodded and left the room. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rotation. Meanwhile, at Bella Not restaurant in North Beach, Sofia tied an apron around her waist and stepped into the chaos of a Saturday night. The restaurant smelled like garlic and wine and the sweat of 40 people working in a space too small for comfort. The kitchen thundered with the sound of pots and pans, the rapid-fire calls of the line cook, the hiss of oil hitting hot metal. Douglas Hale ran the front of the house the way a general runs a battlefield. He was 45, with hair that looked like it had never been washed properly and breath that smelled like burnt coffee and cigarettes. He wore shirts with stains on them and pants that had lost their shape to age and inattention. On his wrist was a gold watch that didn't match anything else about him, stolen, probably, or won in some backroom game. His eyes were the color of dirty water. Sofia's shift started at 9 in the evening and ended at 2 in the morning. She worked for nights a week, after her 14-hour days with the Harrington children. She slept for hours. This had been her rhythm for 8 years. The first shift at Bella Not, Sofia earned $140 in tips. She was careful, graceful, efficient. She read people the way some people read books. She could sense when someone needed space, when someone needed attention, when someone was celebrating and when someone was grieving. She made people feel seen. At the end of the night, Douglas called her into his office, a small room that smelled like stale cigar smoke. House takes 40% of server tips, he said. New policy. Sofia felt the room tilt. 40%. That was $56. That was the cost of groceries for 3 children for 3 days. That's not legal, Sofia heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them, before she understood the stupidity of objecting to a man like Douglas Hale. I need that money. I have children. Douglas stepped close. He was taller than her by nearly a foot. His shadow fell across her face. You need what? He asked. His voice was soft, which was worse than if he'd shouted. You got another job lined up? You got papers that say you can work wherever you want? You got anybody who cares if you show up or disappear? Sofia went silent. He reached out and took her wrist. His hand was warm and strong and there was no gentleness in it. He squeezed until she felt the bone beneath the skin, until her hand started to tingle. House takes 40%, he said again. And if you don't like it, there's 100 girls in this city who would kill for your shift. He released her. She looked down at her wrist. For red marks where his fingers had been. By tomorrow, they would be bruises shaped like crescents. Yes, Sofia whispered. Okay. She walked out with $84. She needed $140. This happened every shift. For 8 years, this happened every shift. In the beginning, she tried to hide the bruises from Emma. She wore long sleeves even in summer. She bathed at night when the children were asleep, careful not to let them see the map of damage written across her skin. One afternoon, Emma asked why her mother always wore sweaters. It was 85 degrees. The mansion's air conditioning was inadequate. I just like them, baby, Sofia said. Makes me feel pretty. Emma studied her mother's face with an intensity that broke Sofia's heart because it meant her daughter was already learning to read danger, already learning to understand that sometimes adults lied to protect children. But what Sofia did not know, what neither she nor Nicholas Caruso could have imagined on this ordinary Thursday night as she scrubbed wine glasses in Bella Not's kitchen and he sat in his office reviewing surveillance photographs of his brother's betrayal, was that 7 days remained. 7 days until the cold October wind would blow her car to the shoulder of Highway 101. 7 days until a convoy of black SUVs would pull up behind her. 7 days until the invisible woman would come face to face with the most dangerous man in San Francisco. 7 days until everything changed. The cafe was almost empty at 8 in the evening, fluorescent lights humming over cracked linoleum, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the stale air like a curse that could not be erased. Sofia sat in the corner booth, her second job uniform still pressed against her skin, black pants, white shirt, the fabric thin from 100 washings. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She didn't drink it. She just needed somewhere to sit that wasn't the Harrington mansion and wasn't Bellinot, somewhere in between her two lives where no one expected anything from her. The bell above the door chimed. Nicholas Caruso walked in like he owned the air itself, his cashmere coat worth more than 3 months of her salary, his dark eye scanning the room with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression, not softness, never that, but a deliberate choice to approach. He slid into the booth across from her without asking permission. "You look exhausted," he said. Sofia's hand stiffened around the cold mug. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that." Nicholas removed his coat, revealing a white dress shirt open at the collar, the scar running from his eye to his cheekbone still healing, pink and tender. "I don't believe you." She looked up, defiant now, because exhaustion had burned away her caution. "What do you want from me, Mr. Caruso?" "Nothing." He leaned forward, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I want to give you something." From inside his jacket, he withdrew an envelope. It was cream-colored, expensive, the kind of envelope that contained decisions and consequences. He slid it across the table between them, the paper whispering against the laminate. Sofia opened it with trembling fingers. A cashier's check. $22,000. The exact amount. The number that had been burning in her pocket for 3 days, crumpled on a foreclosure notice that the bank had delivered to the Harrington mansion, addressed to her in cold official letters. She froze. The coffee shop fell away. There was only the check in her heart and the knowledge that this moment was changing something she couldn't change back. "I can't," she whispered. "You can." "I won't." She shoved the envelope back across the table. "I don't take handouts from anyone, and especially not from." Nicholas didn't retrieve the envelope. He just watched it sit there between them like an accusation. "From who?" "From me?" "From someone who owes you his life." Sofia stood up so fast the booth seat scraped against the floor, a sound like metal on teeth. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do. I stopped my car. I called for help. That's not a debt. That's being human. That's where you're wrong." Nicholas rose too, and he was so tall that the cafe seemed to shrink around him. Most people would have kept driving. Most people look at a bleeding man on the highway and they accelerate. They don't want to get involved. You stopped. You held my head in your lap while blood soaked your jeans. You saved my life. Sofia's voice cracked. By making me feel like a charity case? By reminding me I'm poor and desperate and she couldn't finish. Couldn't say the word that had been echoing in her skull for 8 years, worthless. Nicholas stepped closer. Not threatening. His movements were careful, deliberate, like a man soothing a lost child. "I'm trying to help you because in 15 years of this life, I've never met anyone like you. You're not a charity case, Sofia. You." He stopped, choosing his words like they were loaded weapons. "You're someone worth protecting." The fluorescent light hummed above them. A car passed on the street outside, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. Sofia felt her defenses crumbling like old concrete, and she hated it, hated how badly she wanted to believe him. She sat back down. Nicholas sat across from her, waiting. "Why would you help me?" Sofia's voice barely existed now, trembling like a candle in the wind. "I'm a nanny who sleeps in a closet. I let people steal from me. I let them hurt me because I'm too scared to fight back. Why would someone like you care about someone like me?" Nicholas's expression shifted, became something raw and honest. "Because I know what it's like to be hurt by people you should be able to trust. My own brother tried to kill me 3 years ago. Sold our family to enemies for money." He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. I had to choose between mercy and survival. I chose survival. I killed him myself. This was not something he said aloud. This was not something his men had ever heard him admit. I've carried that weight every day since, Nicholas continued. So when I see someone being hurt, someone enduring hell and still showing up, still fighting for her children, still stopping on a highway to save a stranger. He met her eyes. That's not nobody. That's someone worth protecting. Silence. Real silence, the kind that lived in the space between heartbeats. Sofia picked up the envelope. Her hands were shaking. She opened it again, looked at the check, looked back at him. I'll pay you back. Every cent. I don't want it back. Then I'll feel like I owe you forever. Nicholas studied her face. Then call it a loan. Whatever makes you able to take it. She nodded, unable to speak. The check was real. The weight of it in her hands was real. For the first time in 8 years, the foreclosure notice that had been living in her pocket like a tumor could be erased. Now tell me about the restaurant manager, Nicholas said as Sofia tucked the check back into the envelope. Douglas Hale. Sofia's face went white. The air seemed to stop moving through her lungs. How do you? I know everything, Nicholas said quietly. The stolen tips. The forced overtime. The bruises on your wrist shaped like fingerprints. Tell me. And finally, after 8 years of silence, of hiding her arms under long sleeves in summer heat, of telling Emma that her mother always wore sweaters because they made her feel pretty, Sofia told someone the truth. She told him about the stockroom and the shelves and the way Douglas's fingers dug into the same bruise over and over again, reopening it, keeping it alive. She told him about the split lip she covered with makeup, about the overtime she was forced to work without pay, about the tips that disappeared from her pocket like they had never existed. Nicholas listened. His face became carved from stone, his hands flat on the table, knuckles white. When she finished, his phone vibrated. Once. The kind of vibration that meant something was being set in motion somewhere in the city's shadows, some piece of machinery turning that could not be stopped. He glanced down at the message. His expression didn't change. I have to go, he said. Sofia's stomach dropped. What are you? You're never going back to that restaurant. You're done there. Nicholas stood, slipped his coat back on. The cashmere fell around him like armor. I need that job. I can't just abandon. You don't need it anymore. His voice was final, like the click of a lock. Trust me. He left before she could respond, the door chiming behind him, the November wind rushing in from the street outside, carrying the smell of rain and cold concrete and things that were about to change forever. Sofia sat alone in the booth, the envelope in her hands, the check burning against her palm. She wondered what she had just set in motion. She wondered if she should call him back, tell him not to do whatever he was about to do. But she didn't move. Somewhere across the city, in a residential street in the Richmond district, 12 men in black were already moving through the night like ghosts, like smoke, like a blade wrapped in ice. They converged on a small apartment building where Douglas Hale was pouring himself a drink, celebrating another night of stolen wages and the fear he had carved into a woman who had done nothing except refuse to break. He would break soon enough. The screaming began at 8:06 p.m. The apartment was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking toward midnight. Sofia sat on the concrete floor of her converted closet, her converted room, her converted life, and stared at the piece of paper in her trembling hands. The foreclosure notice. $22,000 in 7 days or the bank would take everything. Everything. The word echoed in her mind like a curse that could not be erased. She looked at Emma sleeping 3 feet away, her daughter's small chest rising and falling in the darkness of that single bare bulb that never quite worked right. The twins lay tangled together in their sleeping bags, their bodies curved against each other the way children do when they have learned early that the world is cold and unpredictable. Sofia had failed them. 8 years of 14-hour shifts, of eating other people's leftovers from restaurant garbage bins, of smiling through bruises and missing tips and Margaret Harrington's public cruelty. 8 years of enduring everything because she had promised her children stability, security, a future. The foreclosure notice crumpled further in her fist. Then the sound came. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Deliberate. Margaret's voice, sharp as broken glass. "Sophia?" "My study." "Now." Sophia's stomach dropped like a stone into black water. She smoothed her clothes, left the closet quietly so as not to wake the children, and made her way through the Harrington mansion's darkened corridors. The clock on the mantelpiece read 11:06 p.m. Her feet made no sound on the marble floors. She had learned long ago how to move through this house like a ghost, like a shadow that refused to leave, present but unacknowledged. Margaret stood by the window, arms crossed, her face carved from fury. The silk of her nightgown caught the light of the city beyond the glass. She did not turn around when Sophia entered. "Where were you this evening?" Margaret's voice was ice-wrapped around a blade. "Working late at the restaurant, Mrs. Harrington." One of the servers called in sick and. "Don't lie to me." Margaret turned, and her eyes burned with the particular cruelty of the wealthy when their power was questioned. "I called Bella not at 8 o'clock. Douglas said you walked out mid-shift. Quit. Just abandoned your post without permission, without notice." She stepped closer. "You're fired, Sophia. Pack your belongings and you have 1 hour to leave this house. I will not have thieves and liars working under my roof." The words landed like gunshots. Sophia's throat closed. "Mrs. Harrington, please. I need this position. I have nowhere else to go. The children. Should have thought of that before you abandoned your responsibilities. 1 hour, Sophia. I want you gone." The door to the study closed behind Margaret with the finality of a coffin lid being sealed. Sophia moved through the mansion in a dream state, down the spiral staircase, through the kitchen, into the converted closet that had been her room for 8 years. She stood in the doorway and looked at her 3 sleeping children. Emma's arm was thrown across her pillow. One of the twins had his thumb in his mouth. They looked so small. So trusting. So completely dependent on a woman who had just been fired for walking out of a job she never actually left. She sank onto the edge of her sleeping bag and put her face in her hands. The scars on her back throbbed, phantom pain, they always ached when stress flooded her body. Her split lip from Douglas's backhand burned. Everything hurt. The cold seeped up from the concrete floor through her jeans, numbing her legs, matching the numbness spreading through her chest. 8 years. 8 years of enduring everything because she believed that if she was strong enough, brave enough, silent enough, her children would have what she never had. Stability. Safety. A home. And now she had $78 in her pocket. The foreclosure notice threatening their actual home. No job. No references. No way forward. Margaret would destroy her reputation with a single phone call. Other families like the Harringtons owned half the city. Nobody would hire a woman that the Harringtons had cast out. The single bulb overhead flickered. It had needed replacing for 3 months. Margaret had never cared enough to fix it. Sophia pulled her knees to her chest and began to rock slightly, the way wounded animals do when pain becomes too large to hold inside. She thought of the check Nicholas had given her. $22,000. It would save the insurance payout. It would cover the foreclosure demand. But it would not find them housing. It would not buy food for 3 growing children. It would not buy her a new life. It would only delay the collapse. And when that money ran out, they would be back here. Desperate. Broken. Invisible. Maybe they would be better off without her. Maybe she had never been anything except a burden, even to her own children. Maybe. Emma shifted in her sleep. Her small voice, barely a whisper, "Love you, Mama." 3 words. Just 3 words from a sleeping child. But they hit Sophia like a blade through her chest, and something hardened inside her. Not hope, something harder than hope. Something that burned like steel being forged. No. I don't give up. Not tonight. Not ever. She stood, wiped her eyes, and began to pack their few belongings into garbage bags. 1 hour. She would make 1 hour work. She would figure out the rest later. But at that same moment, 3 miles away in the Mission District, something else was happening. Something that would change everything. The apartment was dark when Douglas unlocked the door. He flipped the light switch. Nothing. He cursed under his breath and pulled out his phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. That was when he saw him. Nicholas Caruso sat in Douglas's armchair like he owned it. Like he owned Douglas. Like he owned the very air between them. Douglas screamed. His phone clattered to the floor. He stumbled backward, reaching for the door, but the way was blocked. By Tony. By Nino. By 10 other men in tactical black, positioned throughout the apartment like shadows made solid. "Don't move," Nicholas said. His voice was calm. That was what made it terrifying. "Hello, Douglas." "Who? How did you? What do you want?" The words tumbled out, broken and desperate. "I want to talk about Sofia Morales." Douglas's face went white. The color drained like water from a broken vessel. "I don't know who." Nicholas rose from the chair with the deliberate slowness of a predator extending a paw. "You've been stealing from her for 8 years. Tips from her pocket. Wages withheld. Shifts extended without pay. And when she refused to break, when she refused to comply, you put your hands on her. You hurt her." He nodded to Tony, who stepped forward with a tablet. The screen illuminated Douglas's face with footage after footage. 8 years of security camera recordings from Bella Knott. Douglas's hands in Sofia's apron pocket. Douglas cornering her in the freezer. Douglas shoving her, his backhand connecting with her face, blood on her lip, shock in her eyes. "No," Douglas whispered. "No, I'll pay her back. I'll give her everything. Please." "It was never about money," Nicholas said, his voice like thunder rolling through a canyon. "You believed she was nobody. That nobody meant powerless. That powerless meant safe to destroy." He crouched down, his eyes level with Douglas's. "I'm going to show you how wrong you were." He stood and signaled Tony. Douglas tried to run for the window, but the way was blocked. There was nowhere to go. There had never been anywhere to go. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation will arrive at this address in 37 minutes, Nicholas said. "They'll find the $15,000 you've been hoarding. The assault evidence. The documentation of threats you made to 6 other women. All of it will be delivered to federal prosecutors tomorrow morning." He moved toward the door, his men parting to let him pass. "You're looking at 8 to 12 years, Douglas. And when you get to prison, when you're surrounded by men who break other men for sport, remember that you earned every single moment." Douglas collapsed, his screams filling the apartment as Nicholas and his men melted into the San Francisco night like smoke dissolving into nothing. The siren started wailing 15 minutes later. At 6:16 the next morning, Margaret Harrington's doorbell rang. She answered in her silk robe, fury already rising in her throat at being woken so early. 3 men in suits stood on her marble steps. Badges. Federal agents. Briefcases that contained the end of everything she had built. "Margaret Harrington, we have a warrant for your arrest." The words barely registered before neighbors emerged from their homes, before news vans pulled up to the curb, before photographers began snapping pictures of the society matron in her nightclothes being led away in handcuffs. Tax fraud. 16 counts. $340,000 in charity donations that never reached charity. Labor violations. 18 former employees with documented complaints. Withheld wages. Hostile work environment. Wrongful termination. "This is a mistake," Margaret screamed as they placed her in the back of a black sedan. "I know people. I know the mayor. But nobody was listening. By noon, her assets were frozen. The mansion was seized. Her so-called friends had already begun issuing statements distancing themselves from her. By evening, her name was being splashed across every news outlet in the state. By morning, she would be federal property. 40 years without parole. Sofia watched the news on a phone in a motel room she didn't remember how she'd gotten to, in a bed that was clean and soft, with all 3 of her children sleeping peacefully nearby. She saw Margaret's face on the screen, saw the handcuffs, heard the screaming. She watched Douglas's arrest footage play on repeat. 8 years of abuse documented, exposed, witnessed by millions. Her hands shook as she held the phone. She didn't understand how this had happened. How both of them had fallen so far, so fast. But in her bones, in that deepest part of herself that had learned long ago to read the truth beneath surfaces, she knew. Nicholas. It was always Nicholas. She looked down at the check in her lap. $22,000. Not a beginning. A miracle. And miracles, she was learning, sometimes arrived in the shape of a man in a cashmere coat, asking questions no one had asked before, seeing a woman that everyone else had learned to ignore. The phone on the nightstand rang. Unknown number. She answered. Sofia. His voice like thunder, like home, like every safe place she had never had. Are you safe? Yes, she whispered. How did you? I told you. You're never going back to that life. The motel is temporary. In the morning, my people will help you find something permanent. Somewhere with space for 3 children. Somewhere safe. He paused. I promised you that you were not alone anymore. I keep my promises, Sofia. Always. The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. The black town car arrived at exactly 7:45 p.m. Sofia watched from the motel window as it pulled to the curb, its tinted glass reflecting the neon sign behind her. The driver stepped out, Tony, the man from the highway. She recognized his face immediately, though he looked different in daylight. Softer. Less dangerous. She had told herself she wouldn't go. That accepting this invitation was a mistake. That walking toward Nicholas Caruso was walking toward a world that would swallow her whole. But curiosity had won. And something else. Something she couldn't name. The fog rolled in as they drove through San Francisco, thick and wet, swallowing streetlights whole. The scent of salt water from the bay drifted through the car's vents. Sofia sat in the back seat, hands folded, watching the city blur past, Pacific Heights giving way to downtown, downtown bleeding into Chinatown. Narrow streets. Red lanterns. The smell of fish and soy sauce and cooking oil hanging in the November air. Where are we going? Sofia asked, her voice barely steady. Tony glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Somewhere Mr. Caruso conducts certain business. Don't worry, Miss Morales. You're safe. The car descended into an underground parking garage. Concrete walls. Fluorescent lights that made everything look like a hospital or a tomb. The elevator doors opened downward, not up. Sofia's stomach dropped with emotion. When the doors opened again, she stepped into another world entirely. The underground poker room existed like a fever dream. Green felt tables arranged in a perfect circle under hanging lights that cast everything in a sickly amber glow. Cigar smoke hung so thick she could see it, could taste it bitter on her tongue. She coughed softly. Armed guards stood at every door. She counted 6, then 7, then stopped counting when she realized more were obscured by shadow. Stacks of cash sat on tables like sculptures. Men in tailored suits played cards with the intensity of surgeons, their faces carved from stone. They all stopped when she entered. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. In that moment, Sofia understood what it meant to be a creature from another world stepping into this one. A woman in their space was a violation of some unspoken rule. She could read it in their expressions. The slight narrowing of eyes. The way hands moved away from cards. At the center table sat Nicholas. He wore a black suit with no tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with ink she couldn't quite read in the shadows. A glass of whiskey sat untouched in front of him. When he saw Sofia, he stood, not the quick rise of surprise, but a slow, deliberate motion, like a king acknowledging a guest. "Sofia." His voice like thunder rolling across empty ground. "Thank you for coming." He raised his hand. 20 men filed out without a word, a synchronized retreat that took less than 30 seconds. Only Tony and another man, Nino, she remembered, remained by the door. Sofia stood alone with Nicholas in this underground kingdom of his. "What is this place?" she asked. "Where I work. Where I make decisions. Where I've spent the last week cleaning up some problems." He stepped closer, and she noticed for the first time how deliberate his movements were. Every step calculated. Every breath intentional. Douglas Hale is in federal custody. Margaret Harrington is in federal prison. They'll never hurt you again. Sofia's breath caught in her throat. "You did that? Both of them?" "Yes." "Why?" Nicholas stopped. For a long moment, he didn't answer. She could see him struggling, the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands opened and closed at his sides. This powerful man, surrounded by symbols of his power, seemed almost vulnerable. "Because you saved my life," he finally said. "Because you deserved justice. Because I couldn't stand watching you suffer anymore." Sofia's eyes filled with tears. "You've been protecting me. For months. The money in my coat. The school fees. The groceries." Her voice broke on the last word. "All of it." "I wanted to do more," Nicholas said. "But I knew you wouldn't accept help directly. So I did it quietly. The way someone does things for people he stopped himself. For people they care about." Sofia shook her head, tears falling freely now. "Why? I'm nobody. I'm just a nanny who—" "Stop." Nicholas moved closer, and his hand reached for hers. The first time he had touched her since that cold October night on the highway. His skin was warm. Solid. Real. "Stop calling yourself nobody. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived 8 years of hell and never broke. You saved my life without hesitation. You put your children first every single day." He squeezed her hand gently. "Do you know how rare that is? How incredible you are." "I'm not incredible," Sofia whispered. "I'm just trying to survive." "No." His eyes met hers. In the amber light of the poker room, surrounded by the ghosts of his empire, he looked at her like she was the only valuable thing in the entire building. "You're thriving. Despite everything, you're still here. Still fighting. That's not survival, Sofia. That's courage." The cigar smoke seemed to thicken around them. Somewhere distant, the sound of a clock ticking. Sofia's heart beating so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I know I'm asking a lot," Nicholas continued. "I know my world is dangerous and complicated. But I want you in it. Not as someone I'm protecting. As someone who stands beside me. As an equal." Sofia stared at him. "An equal?" "Nicholas, I have nothing. I sleep in a motel room you paid for. I don't even have. You have everything that matters." His voice was firm now, cutting through her doubt like a blade. "You have strength. Integrity. Love for your children. That's more than most people in this room have ever had. That's more than I had before I met you." He paused. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just asking you to consider it. You and your children have a place in my life, if you want it. A real place. Not charity. Not protection. A place." Sofia looked at their joined hands. Then at this underground room, at the cigar smoke and the cash and the armed guards and the symbol of his power that surrounded them. Then at Nicholas Caruso, this dangerous man who had somehow decided that she was worth the complications. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll stay." Nicholas exhaled, relief washing across his face like a wave. "Thank you." They stood together in that underground room as the city above them continued turning, unaware that something had shifted. That an impossible story was becoming real. That miracles didn't always announce themselves. Sometimes they simply arrived in the form of a man asking a woman to stand beside him. 6 months later, the charity gala at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was the city's most anticipated event of the year. Crystal chandeliers. Black marble floors. Society's elite gathered like peacocks, dripping diamonds and ambition. News cameras lined the entrance. Nicholas Caruso arrived with Sofia on his arm. The crowd gasped. Whispers exploded like kindling catching fire. She wore a deep blue gown that fell like water, her hair professionally styled, her shoulders back and her head high. She was terrified, but the terror had become courage by the time they walked through those doors. Photographers snapped pictures in rapid succession. News anchors narrated live, Nicholas Caruso, San Francisco's most eligible bachelor, arriving with mystery woman. Nicholas led Sofia through the crowd, his hand on her lower back, steady and protective. A society reporter approached with a microphone, her smile sharp as cut glass. "Mr. Caruso, can you introduce your date?" Nicholas looked at Sofia. She nodded slightly, barely perceptible. He faced the camera and the crowd and the entire city watching through screens at home. "This is Sofia Morales. And she's not my date. She's the woman who saved my life 6 months ago on a highway outside this city. She had nothing. I had everything. And she stopped anyway." His voice didn't waver. "She showed me what real courage looks like. What sacrifice means. She's the strongest person I know, and I'm proud to call her mine." The reporter's jaw dropped. Are you saying?" "I'm saying I love her." Nicholas turned to Sofia, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. "I should have asked you first before announcing this to the city, but I'm asking now." Sofia cut him off with a kiss. Brief. Gentle. But in front of everyone. When they broke apart, she said, "I love you too." The crowd erupted. 3 months later, they stood on Highway 101 at sunset, at the exact spot where everything had changed. The road stretched empty in both directions. Dead leaves skittered across the asphalt like scattered prayers. Emma and the twins played nearby, their laughter carrying on the cold wind. Nicholas held Sofia's hand. "What are you thinking?" That night, Sofia said softly, "I thought my life was over. That everything was falling apart." She looked at him. "I never imagined it was actually beginning." "Neither did I," Nicholas replied. "I thought I knew what my life would be. Alone. Guarded. Always waiting for the next betrayal." He squeezed her hand. "You changed everything." Sofia smiled. "We changed each other." The sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. A chosen family gathered in the dying light, 2 adults and 3 children who had learned that miracles arrive in broken-down cars on cold October nights. That salvation sometimes wears the face of a stranger. That love isn't always safe, but it's always worth a risk. If this story touched you, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe so you never miss these powerful stories. Because sometimes miracles arrive exactly when you least expect them. Sometimes they come in the form of someone who stops when everyone else would keep driving. Stay ready. Your salvation might be closer than you think. After the rain, the sky clears.